The blade went in easier than I thought it would. Thomas stopped mid-sentence, his eyes wide with surprise as he looked down at the kitchen knife buried in his chest. Blood spread across his white shirt like spilled wine on linen. "I always underestimated me," I whispered, my 70-year-old hands steadier than they'd been in years. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening from in the comments. But to understand how we got here, how a grandmother became a killer twice, you need to know about the night 13 years ago when everything changed. It was a Tuesday in March when I killed my husband, Robert. Not the Tuesday I'd planned to become a widow, mind you, but sometimes life forces your hand in ways you never expect. I was 57 then, still believing that marriage meant something, that the man I'd shared a bed with for 32 years wouldn't try to strangle me over a burned pot roast. The bruises on my throat were still fresh when I made the call that would haunt me for the next 13 years. My fingers trembled as I dialed Thomas's number, Robert's younger brother, the one who always seemed so concerned, so caring, so different from the monster who'd been choking the life out of me just hours before. Thomas arrived within 20 minutes. I remember thinking how quickly he'd come, how he didn't even ask what was wrong when I called crying, just said he'd be right over. At the time, I thought it was love, family loyalty. I was too shaken to see it for what it really was. Opportunity. Robert lay crumpled at the bottom of our basement stairs, his neck twisted at an angle that nature never intended. The fall had done what my desperate shove from the top step had started. I'd only meant to get away from his hands, from his rage, from the way he'd been squeezing until my vision went dark. But gravity had finished what fear had begun. Thomas took one look at the scene and immediately began asking questions. Not about my welfare, not about whether I was hurt, but about what had led to this moment. His eyes moved from Robert's body to the bruises on my neck, then to the broken lamp at the top of the stairs where we'd struggled. I could see him calculating, processing, planning. "We can't call the police," he told me, and at first I thought he was protecting me. Self-defense is hard to prove when you push someone down the stairs. They'll say you could have run. They'll say you chose violence. I was crying, shaking, still feeling Robert's fingers around my throat, and Thomas was talking about evidence and stories and what the neighbors might have heard. He guided me to the kitchen, made me tea with hands that never shook, while my world crumbled around me. The fire was his idea. Not the whole house, he said, just enough to make it look like an accident. Robert had been drinking. There were empty bottles to prove it. He'd fallen asleep with a cigarette, or maybe he'd been cooking and forgotten about it. These things happen to careless men all the time. We spent 3 hours staging my husband's death. Robert moved Robert's body to the living room, positioned him near the couch with an ashtray, and scattered some cigarette ash around. I watched my brother-in-law arrange my life like pieces on a chessboard, creating a story that would satisfy investigators and insurance companies alike. The hardest part wasn't starting the fire. It was calling 911 and pretending to be surprised. Thomas coached me on what to say, how to sound panicked but not too rehearsed. He reminded me to mention the cigarettes, the drinking, how worried I had been about Robert's careless habits. When the sirens finally arrived, Thomas was gone, slipped out the back door like smoke. I played the grieving widow perfectly. The investigators found exactly what they expected to find. A drunk man who'd fallen asleep with a lit cigarette and paid the ultimate price for his carelessness. The insurance company processed the claim without question. Everyone offered their condolences to the poor woman who had lost her husband so tragically. For 3 weeks, I thought I was free. I thought I'd escaped Robert's violence and could finally breathe again. The bruises on my throat had faded, the nightmares were beginning to subside, and I was starting to imagine what a life without fear might look like. Then, Thomas came to collect his payment. It started with a visit to check on how I was doing. Such a caring brother-in-law, everyone said. So thoughtful of him to look after Robert's widow. He brought groceries, helped with household repairs, listened when I needed to talk. I was grateful. Grateful and stupid. The first time it happened, I thought I'd misunderstood. Thomas had been drinking, and when he leaned in to hug me goodbye, his hands lingered too long, moved to places they shouldn't have been. When I pulled away, confused and uncomfortable, he just smiled and reminded me how much we needed each other now. We share a secret, he said, his voice gentle, but his eyes cold. Partners in something this big, we need to stick together, support each other. I didn't understand yet what he meant by support. Not until the second visit when his hands weren't content with just lingering. Not until he made it clear that my freedom had come with a price tag I was only beginning to comprehend. The basement where Robert had died became Thomas's favorite room. He'd stand at the bottom of those stairs and remind me what had happened there, what we'd done together, how quickly my new life could disappear if anyone ever learned the truth. The life insurance money, the sympathy from friends, the clean slate I'd been given, all of it could vanish with one phone call to the police. That's how 13 years of hell began. Not with violence or threats, but with gratitude twisted into something darker. With a debt I never agreed to pay, collected by a man who'd helped me bury one monster only to become another himself. But even in the darkest times, there were moments when life tried to remind me what normal felt like. Small pockets of peace that made the contrast all the more painful when they ended. My daughter Sarah would visit with my granddaughter Emma, filling my house with laughter and the kind of chaos that comes with a 6-year-old who believes the world is full of magic. Emma had Robert's eyes, but none of his cruelty. She'd curl up next to me on the couch, her small head resting against my shoulder while we watched cartoons together. In those moments, I could almost forget about the weight I carried, the secret that pressed down on my chest like a stone. Almost. Sarah never suspected anything. Why would she? Thomas was Uncle Thomas, the man who'd helped her mother through the worst time of her life. He brought birthday presents and Christmas gifts, remembered Emma's school plays and soccer games. He was family, good family, the kind that shows up when you need them most. I became an expert at compartmentalizing my life. There was the grandmother who baked cookies and read bedtime stories, who attended school functions and cheered from the sidelines at Emma's games. Then there was the woman who submitted to Thomas's visits, who learned to disconnect her mind from her body and counted ceiling tiles and recited grocery lists while he took what he believed he was owed. The visits had a pattern.
Tried to refuse him. If I ever fought back or threatened to tell someone, he would immediately call the police and tell them everything. Not just about Robert's death, but about how I'd seduced him into helping me cover it up, how I manipulated him into being an accessory to murder and fraud. He'd already prepared evidence to support that story, photos of the crime scene before we cleaned it up, recordings of our conversations that night, documentation of the insurance settlement. I'd rot in prison, he promised, and everyone I loved would know exactly what I really was. But as long as I kept him happy, as long as I showed proper appreciation for his protection, my secret would remain safe. My family would continue to see me as the poor widow who lost her husband tragically. The community would keep offering their sympathy and support. I could live my lie in peace as long as I paid the price he demanded. Before he left that night, Thomas knelt down beside me and stroked my hair almost tenderly. This was just the beginning, he said. I learned to enjoy our special time together, learned to crave his attention and affection. Some women took longer to adjust than others, but they all came around eventually once they understood how good they had it. He kissed my forehead like a lover saying goodnight and told me he'd see me again soon, very soon. I spent that night in my bathtub, scrubbing my skin raw and trying to wash away the feeling of his hands, his mouth, his body violating mine in ways I couldn't even name. But no amount of soap could clean away the realization that my escape from one monster had delivered me directly into the hands of another, one who was smarter, more patient, and infinitely more dangerous because everyone loved and trusted him. The visits started coming every few days. Thomas would arrive with some transparent excuse, checking on repairs, bringing groceries, making sure I was handling my grief appropriately. Neighbors would see him coming and going, commenting to each other about what a devoted brother-in-law he was, how lucky I was to have such caring family support. Inside my house, away from witnesses, he collected what he considered his payment for that night's rescue. Each assault was worse than the last. not just because of what he did to my body, but because of how he systematically was destroying my mind. He wanted me broken, grateful, completely dependent on his mercy for everything that mattered in my life. The worst part wasn't the physical pain, as excruciating as that was. The worst part was how he made me complicit in my own destruction, forcing me to thank him afterward, to tell him how much I needed his protection, to beg him not to abandon me to face the consequences of Robert's death alone. He was training me to be the perfect victim, someone who would never fight back because the cost of fighting was too high, someone who would smile and express gratitude even while being destroyed from the inside out. And slowly, shamefully, terrifyingly, it worked. But even in hell, life has a way of continuing. The sun still rises, bills still need to be paid, and families still gather for birthdays and holidays. I learned to live two completely separate lives. The grandmother who baked cookies and attended school plays, and the broken woman who counted ceiling tiles while Thomas took what he believed he owned. Those years blurred together in a haze of scheduled visits and carefully maintained facades. Thomas had settled into a routine that worked for both his appetite and his need to remain above suspicion. Twice a week, sometimes 3, always with some believable excuse that would satisfy any neighbor who happened to notice his comings and goings. He'd arrive on Tuesday evenings to check the furnace or look at that leaky faucet. Thursday afternoons became his regular time for helping with groceries or discussing family matters. Weekend visits were reserved for special occasions, when he claimed his apartment was being fumigated, or his heat was out, or he was feeling particularly lonely and needed family company. The community loved him for it. At church, at the grocery store, at Emma's school events, people would comment on what a devoted brother-in-law he was, how fortunate I was to have such caring family support, how wonderful it was to see relatives who actually looked after each other in times of need. If only they knew that his devotion was destroying me piece by piece, visit by visit, year after year. Emma was growing up during this time, transforming from the chubby-cheeked 6-year-old who sat on my lap during cartoons to a lanky preteen with opinions about everything. She spent weekends at my house, filling the rooms with her laughter and energy, creating pockets of genuine joy that made the contrast with my other reality almost